a business as a serial entrepreneur is your mistress and you never leave it. I see a hole in some space and I feel compelled to fill it.
Paul Green's MSP Marketing Podcast.
Extended interview.
Hi, my name is Al Alper. I am CEO of an MSP named Absolute Logic here in the Northeast part of the United States, and also CEO of CyberGuard 360, a channel company providing cybersecurity platform services.
And thank you very much to a mutual connection that we have is a member of mine and a friend, Mark, and I know he's a very, very good friend of yours who put us together and said, you two need to speak. And it's taken some time, hasn't it? Because you're busy, I'm busy, but it's great to actually get you onto the podcast, Al. Now, there are two things that I want to talk to you about. Later on, we're going to talk about your cybersecurity and your compliance business, which of course is CyberGuard 360. We'll talk about that, how you came to start that, and some of the interesting business challenges you've had with that. Let's first of all talk about your MSP, because you are at your heart an MSP owner. So tell us how you got started with your MSP in the first place.
Oh, that's a great question. I took an unusual path to being an MSP. And like all good businesses, or really all good stories, they begin with a woman. But when I say that I took the unusual path, I mean that most MSPs tend to be accidental business owners. They're very good at plying their trade, and they help somebody out, and that person tells a friend how great they are at helping them with their IT, and then that friend starts using them, and then those two people tell two people and tell two people, and so on and so on. And before you know it, they're owning an IT business. I was actually much more intentional about my IT service business. I actually went to school for international finance. And at the time, I was, as I said, every good story starts with a woman. There was a friend of mine. She was a nurse in a doctor's office. And I was working my way through school. I've always paid my own way. We didn't come from a very wealthy family. And this girl that I knew, she was a nurse in a doctor's office. As I said, I was at the time working in the computer center for the university as a way to help reduce my tuition. And that computer center was mainframe based, MVS, for those that who are as gray as I am will know what I'm talking about. And she introduced me to a doctor friend because the doctor she worked for actually, because he wanted to automate and computerize his office. Now, this is the mid 80s. And so I had never touched a PC in my life. In fact, I had barely heard of it. And when she introduced me and I met with him for about 2 hours. And at the end of that meeting, he handed me a $5,000 check.
Whoa.
And I thought, oh, this is pretty easy money. And so I went back to this. I was living in Brooklyn, New York at the time. And I went back to Brooklyn and I opened the Yellow Pages because we didn't have the internet in the mid 80s. And I opened the Yellow Pages and I looked for computer companies, and I started with the A's, and I called everybody starting at the very top, and the first 5 that answered, and I got stuck in the A's, I said, hi, I work for a doctor's office, and this is what we want to do. Can you give me a proposal?
Brilliant.
And a few days later, 3 of those companies sent me proposals for automating this fictitious doctor's office that I worked for. I took the highest proposal. I marked it up 25%. I went back to the doctor, met with him for another hour or so, telling him I met with my team, and he wrote me a check for another $15,000. And that's how I got into this business.
That's awesome. What a great story. What a really great story. So you've had the tech company is it the same company from the mid 80s up till today?
No, actually it's vastly different. I am a serial entrepreneur. So CyberGuard 360, my channel business, that is my 6th enterprise. Okay. Absolute Logic, my MSP, which started in the mid 80s really as a consultancy. And it wasn't named Absolute back then, that more from a consultancy to more of a hardware business to back to a consultancy. I sold the majority interest in that business at the time off to a couple of my employees. And then I started up a factoring company and a few other businesses along the way. I got back into Absolute Logic in the early part of the 20 teens, 2012, 13. I bought it back from the gentleman that I had sold the majority interest into, and converted what was left of the base, the consulting base that we had built originally, to managed services clients. And that took about 2 years. And because the other businesses that was involved in were in financial services, one was a factoring business, the other was a student loan company. Because they were financial services, I was not just the founder of those companies, I was also the CCO, the Chief Compliance Officer. So I was very familiar, intimately familiar with compliance and security, and particularly as it relates to financial service businesses. And so once we had begun to morph into an MSP, I knew at the time I wanted to stand up a compliance practice. And that's what we began to do in 2015-16.
Okay, and we'll come back onto that in just a few moments' time. I want to ask you, Al, what drives you? And I'm fascinated when I talk to serial entrepreneurs, true serial entrepreneurs such as yourself, who have gone from venture to venture to venture. Because I've only been in business since 2005, but I wouldn't consider myself a serial entrepreneur. I built one business up, and we changed it a load of times until we found the right way to do it, and then sold it, and then I started this business. And I've had a couple of side ventures, and I've done a bit of property and whatsoever, but I might have an idea every week of a new business, but I don't act on it. And I choose not to act on it. Whereas whenever I speak to someone like yourself who has literally gone from venture to venture to venture, and you've probably had some failures over the years, but probably a hell of a lot more successes. What drives you to keep launching that next new initiative?
Oh, that's insanity.
Perhaps you're the wrong person I'm asking about this. Maybe I should be asking, is there a Mrs. Al that I should be asking about this?
I'm quite sure she'll say the same thing. So what drives me? I'm a problem solver. Um, I see a gap somewhere, and I feel compelled to fill it. It's one of those things, and it's torturous to Mrs. Al, otherwise known as Janice, by the way. It's torturous to her because I am, when you're a serial entrepreneur, this is your life financially. This is your life from a time perspective. This is your life from a commitment perspective. It's a business as a serial entrepreneur. A business is your mistress, and you never leave it. I mean, I'm in my home office now, as you can see from my surrounds. And in all of the places that we've lived, I've always carved out space for a home office. And that's because I love what I do. I love the enterprises I get involved in. I am passionate about trying to deliver on the promise I made to myself and the promise that I make to the vertical and the people who entrust us with their businesses and their customers to deliver on the promise we make to them. And I see a hole in some space, and I feel compelled to fill it. I've got a Teams channel. It used to be a Slack channel. We've switched to Teams. I have a Teams channel called Ideation. And anytime I see something missing, I just throw it up there. And once every couple of weeks, I look at that list and say, all right, was that a real thought? Was that something worth going after? Should I invest a little money and do some due diligence to see if there's an opportunity there? And at any one point in time, there might be 20 or 30 things on that board. I mean, I was just at an ASCII event last week, as a matter of fact, and I was talking to a bunch of MSPs, and in the process of that discussion, two things landed on the ideation board. Just one of them, I think, could be really interesting. I've already tasked a couple of developers to look at how easy it would be to do. That to me is not necessarily a side business. It's an app that'll go on a smartphone, and it might throw off some revenue, and it might not. I just thought it was a really interesting opportunity and an interesting play for something that I couldn't find that I would actually use. And that to me is what I mean by identifying sort of a hole in the landscape. And if I can fill it and I have the capacity and the capital, either the intellectual capital or the financial capital to fill that gap, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're going to come back to this subject on our extended interview, which we'll be doing on YouTube. And I'll have some more details about that in just a few minutes. But let's return now to CyberGuard 360. So you said earlier that as you were growing your MSP and doing that transformation process when you took over Absolute Logic again, it became really clear to you that there was an opportunity for security and compliance. So how did you end up launching CyberGuard 360?
Oh, that's okay. You ask really good questions, by the way.
Thank you.
So, as I said, because of my competency in the financial services and compliance space around that, and a lot of compliance, if you've ever been involved in any kind of a compliance audit, the lion's share of a compliance audit is around systems and processes, which is a natural extension for an MSP. In fact, I am quite amazed at the number of MSPs that aren't offering compliance services today. And that's not me pitching CyberGuard. Obviously, we'd love to have them as partners. But it is a natural extension for an MSP's business model because it's all about systems and processes. And to the extent that you can satisfy a compliance regulator or a law around those systems and processes, you should be offering that as a service. And so when we were standing up the MSP more robustly in the mid 20 teens, a number of the clients that we onboarded came from my relationships in financial services. And this is on or about the time. So I already knew I wanted to do something in compliance and security because I came from that world. And this is about the time that the New York State Department of Financial Services had begun promulgating the first in the U.S. cybersecurity regulation. The formal number is 23 NYCRR 500, otherwise known as the New York State Cybersecurity Regulation. And it's quite literally the first in the nation, if not one of the first codified cybersecurity regulations in the world. And this is in 2016-ish. And some of our clients who were financial service associations approached us saying, hey, the department is looking to enact this regulation. They're asking us for a response. I don't even know what I'm looking at. Can you help us respond to this? And so I took a look at it, and you don't have to hit me with a bat to see that there's an opportunity. And I immediately saw that we had an opportunity to build a compliance stack that satisfied the regulation 100% and at the same time help our associations and financial service clients who would soon be obligated under that to fulfill it. And we spent about a year building the stack. And part of that stack included something that I needed to build. Remember, I said that I was great at identifying holes in the landscape. Well, as we built the stack and I was matching that to what was being promulgated by the department, there was a gaping hole in the vendor space. And that gaping hole needed to be filled if I was going to have the solution that I needed for our clients. And so I tasked the dev team to build the first version of what soon would become PG360. And we built that and we launched the platform and our solution on March 1st of 2017 when the law went into effect, when the regulation went into effect. By the end of 2017, we were the largest supplier of cybersecurity regulations under cybersecurity compliance services under that regulation in the Northeast. By the end of the first year, we were the largest in the country.
Wow.
And to this day, we are still the largest supplier of DFS cybersecurity compliance services in the country because of that. But in that first year, we had generated over $1 million in brand new revenue and brought in over 100 new clients as a result of that. And all of my MSP colleagues were like, how the heck are you doing this? And I just showed them our stack. I said, here, replicate it. And every one of them to an MSP that saw the platform said I wanted it. and I knew I had a vendor opportunity in front of me. And
Oh,
again,
oh, I see. So your first $1 million of new revenue was just from end clients. It wasn't from MSPs. So you didn't launch it as a partner program from day one.
not at all. I launched it as a
Ah.
solution for our MSP clients' businesses.
So then when your MSP friends were saying, this is a classic story. How many times have we heard this on the podcast? You build something amazing. Your MSP friends say, I want that. And then you just have to do a little bit of work to make it suitable for all MSPs to use it.
I wouldn't say a little bit, because it was when the first iteration was tightly interwoven with all of the other moving parts of the stack that I built. And because when you're a vendor in the channel, you have to be vendor agnostic for all the other vendors in the channel.
Yeah.
So, like, we're a Sophos shop for our security, for our endpoint security, next gen endpoint security. That first iteration was tightly interwoven with Sophos. And so when we spun it off in 2018, and built it up, we actually formalized CyberGuard as a company in 2017 when we decided to spin it off. And then when we ripped the platform out of Absolute Logic, my MSP, it took us almost a year and a half to rebuild it so that it would be completely vendor agnostic and it could stand on its own no matter what other moving parts and other MSP might have in their stack.
Yeah. Yeah. And where that was about 5 years, 4 or 5 years ago. So where are you at now in terms of serving MSPs?
We're a very large. I would argue we're a very large vendor in the space. We currently have about 500 plus MSPs that leverage our platforms on a daily basis. We've got more than 40,000 users on the platform. Users include both MSPs and their clients, by the
Yeah.
way. Some 15 plus thousand businesses that are on the platform. It's been an unbelievable ride, an unbelievable. It's surpassed our wildest expectations, frankly.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Now, look, you and I are going to go on and continue to talk about this, and I want to actually come back to the subject of entrepreneurism with you. Entrepreneurism, is that a word? Entrepreneurism. What's the word, Al?
There
That's
you
the
go.
one.
Entrepreneurialism.
There's
It's
business.
a tough word.
Let's just say doing business. I think that's an easier way to do it. So I want to come back to that subject with you in the extended interview. Just for now, tell us a little bit more about CyberGuard 360. What's the service for? Who should buy it? And how can we get hold of you?
So CyberGuard 360, if you go to cyberguard360.com, that you'll find our platforms there. We have several platforms that effectively all come through PG360. PG360 is the first platform that we've launched to the MSP community in 2019, right before the pandemic. That was fun. And that really, I call that the client-facing side of the cyber stack. So it does everything from dark web monitoring to risk assessments, simulated phishing to policy management, and anything that a user and or a client would touch. And that's been the reason why that's been wildly successful, frankly, is because we believe that there's an old saying in business: don't expect what you don't inspect. And so delivering business intelligence out of the platform is really our strong point. So while a lot of other companies deliver silos of what we deliver, we integrate it all to give the MSP's clients and the MSP themselves actionable BI that they can use to make better business decisions. That's our core platform. And then we have other platforms. We call it PG++, that includes a penetration testing tool for external penetration testing, a vulnerability assessment tool for internal and external vulnerability assessments, and our own prospecting tool called Chris, which is a breach probability engine. Frankly, and I say this from the MSP side of my life, it has been the absolute single best prospecting tool I, in my MSP, have ever used. I'm not saying that because I own it. I did a I did a webinar to an audience of there were over 90. I don't quote me on the number, but over 90 people registered. I sent them Chris it's a breach probability engine for them to run, and then we were going to go over the results on the webinar. 83 people showed up for the webinar.
Whoa.
I closed 54 deals from the front of the room.
Wow.
I have never done that in my life as an MSP.
And let's pick up straight talking about Chris, the breach. Oh, I've forgotten it again. Was it the breach probability engine? So how does that? When I say I'm going to ask you how it works, and I don't mean technically how does it work, but how does it look? Does it look for people who could be breached at some point? Is that how it's set up to work?
So it's actually we sort of triangulate data and then attempt to actually break in. So it is a form of white hat hacking, which is why it's fully automated, to be clear. So which is why when you're running Chris, you need to have permission to do it, because hacking, whether it's white hat or black hat, is illegal.
Yes.
Right? So let's just be clear about that. So what Chris does is Chris identifies data in the public space against an asset you want to see if it can be breached, and then attempts to leverage the data that's available in the public domain to penetrate that asset that you've targeted.
Got it. So
that makes sense.
It does. And remember, I'm not a tech, but I obviously spend 200 hours a week involving myself in tech issues. So what you're trying to do with or what the MSPs can do with Chris, with their clients' permission, is to see how actionable the data that's out there is against their client. So essentially, it's almost like an automated test to see if a hacker was trying to do this, how successful would they be?
That's it in a nutshell. That's a perfect explanation.
Got it. Thank you very much. So, okay, that makes sense. So I can see why that would be an incredible prospecting tool, because I've interviewed Matt Solomon back when he was with ID Agent, a few years ago, and he was on very early on in the podcast, and we had a long conversation about using ID Agent as a prospecting tool. And obviously, there are lots of other tools out there right now. There's tools like MSP Dark Web and similar other tools, and they're great prospecting tools because they show you what has been breached. But this is taking it to a whole new level, isn't it? This is showing your potential clients how their information that's already out there could be used against them. So you mentioned using that in a room to sign up a whole load of new clients in a webinar. Is that something you recommend to the MSPs that you're partnering with, or do you recommend a different approach?
No, so the way we use it, so let me back up just a little bit. Every single moving part of CyberGuard's platforms first are tested in my MSP. And that's intentional because the tools are built for MSPs, and I enjoy the benefit of owning an MSP. And that gives me the ability to have a live Petri dish to test both the validity of what we're doing, but also the value proposition for the MSP and their clients. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, when we were developing Chris, as I said, I thought it would be a great idea to have a breach probability engine. My dev team, said, yes, we can do something like that. And they began to build it, and we tested it internally. And as it developed over the course of the latter part of last year, we're showing some really terrific results. In January, I put on an event in my MSP. So this is now the MSP hat I'm wearing. I did an event for a number of companies that we invited to participate in this, where I was going to go over the value of knowing how likely you were to be breached. And everybody who registered got a link to run a Chris score against their front-facing asset, their website, whatever the case may be. And there were over 90 people that registered. They all completed the Chris. And they all completed the Chris form, and we ran Chris tests against them. 83 people showed up. I'm probably off by one or two because it happened a couple of months ago. 83 people showed up for this. And what we did was we went over what the score meant. I didn't go over the individual scores. I said, this is what this means, because Chris, when presented to a prospect, looks just like FICO.
Yeah.
So everybody knows FICO, so we were intentional about making it look like FICO so it was easy to digest. And we just explained that, the lower the FICO, the lower the CRIS score, the higher the likelihood someone's going to breach your company. Because the triangulation of data and vulnerabilities and the public-facing asset, this is what that likelihood looked like. And 54 people, 52 on the call, and then 2 the next day with follow-up calls, signed up for either one form or fashion, for either a one-off project, or signed up to become a compliance client of ours.
Yeah, that's just insane figures.
It was beyond insane.
I bet, yes.
I've never
I bet.
had that happen in my life.
No, and actually that creates a massive delivery impact for you, which is a nice problem to have. But yeah, not so smooth for getting the work out the door. And is CRIS an acronym for something?
Yes, it stands for Cyber Risk Index Score.
Lovely. I bet the day you came up with that, you were all high-fiving each other saying, this is it, we've got the name for it.
1,000, easy to remember.
Very easy to remember.
Most people can't even tell you what FICO stands for, by the way.
No, and do you know what? Actually, here in the UK, that's not a term we're familiar with. So for our UK viewers, just tell us what a FICO score is.
So a FICO score, that's your credit score. So everybody if you want to buy something, or and you want to get it on terms, like whether you want to buy a car on terms, or you want a new credit card or a house, companies look at your FICO score. That's your credit rating, so to speak.
Got it.
The actual acronym stands for Fair Isaacs Corporation.
Of course.
And that's the company back in the 40s or 50s that created this score.
Okay, that makes
Most
perfect
people
sense.
wouldn't know that.
No, they wouldn't. That's and as I say, I don't know about the rest of the world, but certainly here in the UK, that's not a term we've heard before. Anyway, right, let's talk about ideas and focus. So you're clearly one of those guys that has so many ideas. You said yourself earlier on in our podcast interview that you have a Teams channel that's dedicated just to ideas, and that's where you go and dump the ideas. How do you... Let me restart that question again. I have lots of ideas too, as I think I was saying earlier, and I dump mine in. I actually use something called Todoist, which is just a productivity system, and I have a thing in Todoist called the black hole. And the black hole is where if I get an idea out of my head and it sits around for a few days, but it's not for now, I'll dump it in the black hole. And if I'm still thinking about it a week later, it comes back out the black hole and I'll do something with it. And I now and again just look in the black hole, and there's 10 to 15 years worth of ideas in there. And of course, a lot of them have gone. The world has moved on, or I've moved on. But then I sometimes look at these and think, that's such a good idea. I could do that. That could be a £1 million business, or it could be a huge cash suck and a huge time suck. As someone who has lots of ideas, how do you keep your focus on? You've got a successful MSP, you've got a successful cybersecurity company. I wouldn't be surprised if you tell me you've got another company somewhere that you're running, or that you at least own. How do you keep your focus on making sure all of these things are successful, and seeing Janice, and having holidays, and having a good quality of life?
So something has to. So two things. On the personal side, something has to be sacrificed, right? There's a work balance, fun, and there's work life fun balance. Let me phrase that properly.
Yeah, I always call it fun. Oh, so in this order: family first, then fun, cash, time, and meaningful work. I think it's roughly in those. Those are the 5 things we need to be. I think it's called the happy balance. That's it. So the 5 things you need to be happy is fun, family, time, cash, and meaningful work.
So for me, one of the things, I love what I do, and I said that in the podcast, and I say it now, and I live it. I literally love what I do. The reason I've had as many businesses that I've had is because I fall in love with the idea of getting that done And to the extent that I'm enjoying the heck out of it, I stick with it. And then when I don't, I sell it or we do something else with it. So that's for me. I'm having fun doing this. I'm having fun when I go to the shows. I have fun in the office when I'm huddling with my team. So I enjoy thoroughly what I do in my professional life. My wife works in the company, so I get to see her on a regular basis. When they were younger, and when my kids were younger, and we didn't have as much money as we enjoy today, unfortunately, that part of my life relationships suffered at the expense of I had poor balance. Let me put it that way, and I
Mm.
don't recommend what I did for anybody else. I think you should find a way to balance the family with a lot more priority than I gave it. To be fair to my kids, but staying focused. When I was younger, and I won't say younger, when we had less, when we weren't fortunate enough, so we didn't have the resources that we have today, both financial resources and professional resources to draw upon. I was doing all of it
Mm.
effectively myself. I brought in some people from time to time to help out with it. So a lot of ideas were just left on the table because I didn't have the bandwidth to invest and to see how far that I could go before I could determine whether or not they had the value that they deserved. I'm fortunate enough now that I don't do that. Some of them where there's an obvious immediate need for it. I invest myself fully. In the mid '90s, I stood up a phone company as an example, and halfway through standing it up, believe it or not, an executive at MCI stole it and started a company. I won't mention
Wow.
the company's name.
Wow.
Um, and I'm not mad at it. I was young, and part of the problem when you're young is you let ego get in the way. And I thought I knew everything I needed to know, and I really should have hired a lawyer. Is what I should have done. And so, anyway, you learn along the way. That was one of my failings. I dumped almost a life savings into standing up that phone business, by the way. So that's one of those failures that I can go into it at length if that's of interest, but it was just one of those that great lessons learned and a brutally expensive
Yes. So, I
lesson
mean,
learned.
that was going to be my next question, actually, about and my penultimate question was about failures. And please don't name names because it saves us having to bleep company names out. It's so much easier if you don't. But obviously, so you got stitched over by a guy. You didn't lawyer up. That was a massive life lesson, and clearly you financially recovered from it. And I'm sure you've had anyone who is massively active, and you are a massively active person. That's why it's wonderful to talk to you. Anyone who is massively active inevitably has setbacks along the way. And I'm sure you could, I could sit and reel off 10, 20, 30 bad things that have happened to me over the years, or things that didn't quite pan out, or we put money into things and it didn't work. But then you look on the balance is, well, more things paid off. In the grand scheme of things, we've made more money than we've lost more money over the years. How a lot of people get stuck in failure, Al, and I think they have a setback, a major setback, and they, I think, almost emotionally, they never recover from it. So financially and operationally, they might do, but they become more fearful and therefore held back by their fear. What have you done over the years to stop that from affecting you?
So, anybody who knows me, excuse me, anybody who knows me, they will tell you that I am always my answer to everything is how. Anytime somebody says how are you doing, it's like I'm doing great. I'm awesome. I just I live that. I don't let failures be something that holds me back or that I will dwell on. I will learn from them, and so I look at failures as an opportunity to do better the next time because I don't believe that I'm stuck in the life that I have today if it's a life that I don't want to live. You know, I I I enjoy the belief, and I mean this sincerely, that I decide every single day how I'm going to go to sleep. Am I going to go to sleep happy or am I going to sleep sad or angry? And I get to decide that. And I've had people say to me, well, what if somebody does this to you, or what if somebody does that to you? I can't stop what other people do. I can stop how I react to them. And so because I have full control over the way I'll react, I decide how I go to sleep every night. And that philosophy demands, by definition, that I don't get mired down in roadblocks. I don't, when that executive took my idea, it was my mistake. Not, yes, he's less than worthy, but it was my mistake. And my learning from that was everything I do, I protect myself in doing, so that if somebody were to attempt to do that again to me, I've at least now got the audit trail to demonstrate that, hey, this was really belonged to me, and you have no right to do that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you're getting mired down in failure, then you're not looking at the cup being half full. That is a tremendous opportunity to learn what not to do the next time. It also opens your eyes to opportunities you didn't realize were there to begin with.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge educational opportunity in every single failure. And I strongly encourage people who get mired down to just stand back for a moment and think to themselves, what would I tell a friend if they were telling me the story about what's happening to me right now?
You're a very quotable person, Al. I've written down a couple of quotes. In fact, one of our previous guests, Justin Esgar, who I don't think lives too far from you, he's in somewhere in New York, and he's a very entrepreneurial person, and he has a T-shirt printing company. And I know he's listened to episodes of this podcast before and pulled out phrases that people have said and turned them into T-shirts. You said earlier, failures are an opportunity to do better, which I just love that. That's a great quote. But right back near the beginning of our interview, we're getting up for coming up for 40 minutes ago, you said business is your mistress, which is so absolutely true. And both of these, Justin, if you've got this far into the video, it'd be great to see those as T-shirts. And I'm sure both Al and I will at least buy a couple of those. So Al, thank you so much. You've been incredibly generous with your time. I could keep talking to you, but we do have to end this interview at some point. So CyberGuard 360, just remind us again of the website address so we can go and check that one out.
So it's cyberguard360.com, obviously HTTPS, cyberguard360.com, and on there you can find our myriad platforms. You can see Chris and see what it does. It's a tremendous prospecting tool for us anyway.
Paul Green's MSP Marketing Podcast.
Extended interview.